In a strategic move amid ongoing tensions with the United States, Chinese President Xi Jinping is embarking on a significant tour of Southeast Asia, starting with Vietnam on Monday. This trip comes at a critical juncture as Xi seeks to bolster economic ties with neighboring countries grappling with the fallout of a contentious trade war initiated by the Trump administration. With tariffs imposed on Chinese imports sparking fears of economic instability in the region, Xi's visit is being framed as an effort to position China as a dependable partner in contrast to the unpredictability of U.S. trade policies. The backdrop to Xi's tour is a recent series of punitive tariffs imposed by the U.S., which have escalated to a staggering 145% on various Chinese goods. These tariffs have not only rattled the Chinese economy but also sent shockwaves through Southeast Asia, where countries like Vietnam and Cambodia have been heavily impacted. For instance, Vietnam, a manufacturing hub, has faced a 46% tariff on its exports to the U.S., while Cambodia's garment industry, crucial to its economy, is similarly threatened by trade restrictions. According to data shared by Vietnam's government, U.S. exports account for a substantial 30% of its GDP, making the stakes in these negotiations particularly high. During his visit, Xi is expected to oversee the signing of numerous agreements, including crucial investment deals aimed at enhancing Vietnam's railway infrastructure with Chinese loans. Aiming to further solidify ties, he will also travel to Malaysia and Cambodia, countries that have similarly felt the sting of U.S. tariffs. Notably, Xi's last visits to these nations were over a decade ago, underscoring the importance of this diplomatic outreach. Chinese officials are keen to capitalize on the current environment, where they are attempting to portray the U.S. as a rogue nation in terms of trade practices. Stephen Olson, a former U.S. trade negotiator, noted that Xi's tour could serve to present China as a responsible leader committed to a rules-based trade system, while simultaneously highlighting the U.S. as a source of instability in global markets. However, this visit also places Southeast Asian nations, particularly Vietnam, in a delicate position. As they navigate their economic relationships with both China and the U.S., there is a pressing need to avoid appearing too aligned with either superpower, especially while negotiating for relief from U.S. tariffs. Analysts have pointed out that while Vietnam may welcome the economic partnerships with China, it must tread carefully to maintain its standing with the U.S., which has been a crucial counterbalance to Chinese influence in the region. Moreover, the potential for an influx of Chinese goods into Southeast Asia as a result of U.S. tariffs raises concerns about local industries being overwhelmed. Countries are now contemplating measures to safeguard their markets from what could be perceived as dumping of Chinese products, further complicating the regional economic landscape. As Xi seeks to reinforce China's position in Southeast Asia, he must also address the underlying security concerns stemming from territorial disputes in the South China Sea. Recent military activities by Chinese naval forces have exacerbated tensions with Vietnam and Malaysia, and analysts suggest that Xi may need to dial back some of these aggressive postures to foster a more cooperative atmosphere during his visit. In light of these complexities, the outcomes of Xi's diplomatic endeavors remain uncertain. While the signing of agreements may bolster symbolic ties, the real test will be in the concrete benefits these nations stand to gain amidst the turbulent backdrop of U.S.-China relations. As the region watches closely, the implications of Xi's tour could set the tone for future interactions between Southeast Asian nations and the two global powers. As the week unfolds, the international community will be keenly observing the developments from Xi's tour, with an eye toward how these nations balance their relationships against the backdrop of a trade war that shows no signs of abating. The delicate dance of diplomacy in Southeast Asia continues as countries strive to protect their interests in an increasingly polarized global landscape. As the trade war between the United States and China intensifies, recent developments reveal a deepening impasse that is affecting global markets and business operations. On April 13, 2025, U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer confirmed during an interview on CBS Face the Nation that President Donald Trump currently has no plans to engage in direct talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping. This announcement comes amid escalating tariffs and rising tensions between the nations, leaving many businesses caught in the crossfire. Greer stated, "Right now we don't have any plans on that," responding to a question about potential communications between the two leaders. He emphasized that the ongoing trade issues are primarily at the leaders' level and indicated that the U.S. remains open to negotiations at some point in the future. The backdrop of this standoff is marked by the U.S. administration's aggressive tariff strategy, which has seen rates on Chinese imports soar from 54% to as high as 145% in a matter of days. In retaliation, China has responded with its own steep tariffs, raising rates on American goods to 125%. The situation is particularly precarious for U.S. businesses that rely on Chinese imports. Many companies, from hardware stores to toy manufacturers, are struggling to navigate the new tariff landscape. Rick Woldenberg, CEO of learning resources and educational toy manufacturer, lamented the impact of the tariffs, stating, "We're being asphyxiated by our very own government." He highlighted that his company could face over $100 million in tariffs this year alone, a staggering figure that threatens its survival. Despite the turmoil, President Trump has expressed a desire for dialogue, believing that China is interested in making a deal but is hesitant about how to approach the conversation. Analysts, however, are skeptical about the likelihood of a resolution anytime soon. Julian Evans Pritchard from Capital Economics noted a partial rollback of tariffs still seems likely at some point. But it is hard to envisage a meaningful reset in the U.S.-China relationship. The implications of this trade war extend beyond immediate economic concerns. As the U.S. grapples with a declining dollar and fluctuating consumer sentiment, the geopolitical stakes have risen. The Pentagon is reportedly evaluating potential national security risks, including the possibility that China might restrict exports of rare earth minerals critical to U.S. defense systems. Amidst these developments, Xi Jinping is set to embark on a 5-day diplomatic tour in Southeast Asia to strengthen trade relations with nations such as Vietnam and Malaysia, both of which have significant ties to the U.S. While the Chinese government maintains that it does not seek to escalate tensions, it has also made it clear that it views the U.S. tariffs as acts of aggression that demand a firm response. The broader narrative of the trade war reflects a complex interplay of economic strategy and national pride. China's leadership is leveraging the situation to foster a narrative of resistance against perceived U.S. aggression, which resonates with historical sentiments of national humiliation. This strategy may serve to bolster domestic support for Xi's government amid economic challenges. As both nations remain entrenched in their positions, the road ahead looks uncertain. The potential for a diplomatic breakthrough seems limited, and the economic fallout of the ongoing trade war continues to ripple through global markets. U.S. businesses are left to grapple with unprecedented challenges, while the geopolitical landscape shifts in response to this enduring conflict. The future of U.S.-China relations hinges on whether either side can find common ground amid escalating tensions, but for now the prospects appear dim. In a pivotal moment for Southeast Asia, Chinese President Xi Jinping is set to embark on a significant tour beginning in Vietnam amid rising tensions from a protracted trade war with the United States. This visit, which will also include Malaysia and Cambodia, is aimed at reinforcing economic ties and positioning China as a stable partner in a region increasingly wary of U.S. tariffs and trade policies. Xi's visit to Vietnam marks his first since December, and it is expected to set the stage for a flurry of investment agreements, particularly in infrastructure development, including a potential boost to Vietnam's railway network. Vietnamese officials have expressed optimism about the discussions, which come at a time when the nation is grappling with the repercussions of U.S. tariffs that have drastically affected its economy. The U.S. recently imposed tariffs of 46% on Vietnamese exports, a move that has left the country in a precarious position given that U.S. exports constitute a substantial portion of its GDP. As the trade war intensifies, China has urged the U.S. to rescind its tariffs completely, with a spokesperson from China's Commerce Ministry stating, "We urge the U.S. to take a big step to correct its mistakes and return to the right path of mutual respect." This statement reflects China's strategy to frame itself as a responsible leader in global trade, contrasting sharply with the U.S. approach, which has been characterized by unilateral actions. The implications of these tariffs are particularly severe for Vietnam and Cambodia, both of which rely heavily on manufacturing and exports to the U.S. The garment industry in Cambodia, for instance, faces potential devastation as it employs approximately 750,000 workers and accounts for a significant portion of the country's GDP. Analysts suggest that these developments could lead to a flood of cheaper Chinese goods into neighboring countries, undermining local industries and further complicating the economic landscape. Stephen Olson, a former U.S. trade negotiator, noted that Xi's tour is likely a calculated effort to position China as the responsible leader in the global trade system while painting the U.S. as a disruptive force. He emphasized that while concrete agreements may be difficult to realize, the symbolic value of these discussions cannot be overstated. Vietnam's response to the tariff crisis has been proactive. In an effort to mitigate the effects of the tariffs, Vietnam sent its deputy prime minister to Washington to negotiate a reduction in tariffs on U.S. imports and has committed to increasing purchases of American goods, including defense and security products. Furthermore, Vietnam is preparing to tighten controls on sensitive exports to China, particularly dual-use goods such as semiconductors. The tension between the U.S. and China is not merely economic. It has broader geopolitical implications as both countries vie for influence in Southeast Asia. As nations in the region navigate this complex landscape, they face the challenge of maintaining a delicate balance between their ties to the U.S. and their economic dependence on China. Xi's tour is part of a broader strategy by China to strengthen its relationships in the wake of the trade war. The visit to Malaysia is being hailed as an important milestone, and Cambodia's leadership has reaffirmed its steadfast alliance with Beijing. As these nations engage with China, they are keenly aware of the need to address the economic vulnerabilities that have arisen from the tariffs. With the global economic environment in flux, the stakes for Xi Jinping are high. The outcome of this tour could shape the future of China's economic partnerships in Southeast Asia and redefine the region's trade dynamics. As both the U.S. and China grapple with their respective economic challenges, the path forward will require careful negotiation and a commitment to dialogue. The world watches closely as the repercussions of this trade war resonate far beyond the immediate players involved, potentially reshaping the fabric of international commerce for years to come. As tensions simmer between the United States and China, the specter of a trade war morphing into a military conflict looms larger than ever. Both nations have escalated their rhetoric and economic measures, with President Donald Trump's recent tariff hikes marking a significant pivot in U.S. policy. While the initial trade war began as a series of economic sanctions, it has now evolved into a zero-sum game, with each side seeking to assert dominance in a rapidly changing geopolitical landscape. The implications of this escalating conflict are profound, not just for the two nations involved but for the global economy and international stability. President Trump's decision to impose punitive tariffs on China despite facing pressure from Wall Street and a tumultuous bond market signals a hardening of U.S. resolve against what many officials perceive as Chinese economic aggression. According to Jake Werner, director of the East Asia program at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, this escalation could lead to serious economic pain for both countries. The interdependence of their economies complicates matters further, as supply chains risk unraveling. Businesses and consumers alike are left in a state of uncertainty. The U.S. administration is influenced by various factions that view confrontation with China through different lenses. From neoconservatives who perceive an ideological battle against Chinese communism to nationalists who aim to isolate the Chinese economy, a consensus has emerged: the U.S. must confront China decisively. Heritage Foundation President Kevin Roberts succinctly encapsulated this sentiment, arguing that China has stolen our technology, spied on our people, and threatened our allies. This narrative fosters a climate where diplomatic solutions are increasingly viewed as naive and military readiness is prioritized. The potential for military conflict is compounded by China's expanding military capabilities, particularly its missile arsenal. As detailed by Julian McBride of 1945, China's People's Liberation Army (PLA) has developed a formidable range of medium and intermediate-range ballistic missiles that threaten U.S. military assets in the Indo-Pacific region. With approximately 1,300 medium-range Dongfeng missiles at its disposal, China aims to neutralize American advantages in aerial and naval power. This missile threat not only complicates U.S. defense strategies but also raises the stakes in any potential conflict over flashpoints like Taiwan or the South China Sea. The implications of these developments are dire. The U.S. military's ability to project force in the region could be severely hampered as critical infrastructure like runways and naval bases become vulnerable targets. The PLA's strategy appears focused on denying American forces the ability to operate freely, which could embolden Chinese aggression in territorial disputes. The call for enhanced missile defense systems and regional military partnerships has never been more urgent. Looking ahead, the risk of an all-out conflict between the U.S. and China is contingent upon the ability of both nations to navigate their differences without resorting to violence. As economic ties fray and military posturing intensifies, the potential for miscalculations increases. It is crucial for leaders on both sides to recognize the value of dialogue and cooperative frameworks that address mutual interests such as climate change and global economic stability. The future trajectory of U.S.-China relations remains uncertain, but what is clear is that the path forward will require careful management of their complex interdependencies. Without a commitment to diplomacy and conflict resolution, the world may find itself on the brink of a devastating confrontation that could reshape international relations for generations. As both nations grapple with their identities and aspirations on the global stage, the hope for peace hinges on their willingness to seek common ground amidst escalating tensions. As President Xi Jinping embarks on a significant diplomatic journey through Southeast Asia, observers are keenly noting the implications of his visit, which aims to reinforce regional ties amid escalating global trade tensions. Starting April 14, 2025, Xi's 5-day tour will see him engage with leaders from Vietnam, Malaysia, and Cambodia, marking his first overseas trip of the year and a clear signal of China's commitment to its neighboring countries. The backdrop to this trip is a landscape shaped by the tumultuous trade policies of the United States, particularly the sweeping tariffs instituted by former President Donald Trump. These tariffs have created uncertainty, particularly for developing nations that rely heavily on trade with China. As articulated by Chinese Commerce Minister Wang Wentao, the U.S. tariff strategy poses serious risks to global economic stability, prompting many countries, including those in ASEAN, to seek stronger ties with Beijing. Gu Jiayun, Vice Dean of Beijing Foreign Studies University's School of Asian Studies, explained that Xi's choice of Southeast Asia for his first state visit underscores the increasing importance China places on its immediate neighbors, particularly following a recent Central Conference focusing on neighboring country relations. This trip not only aims to boost confidence in the region but also to provide stability as nations navigate the chaos brought on by U.S. trade policies, Gu stated. Historically, China has prioritized its relationships with neighboring nations under the guiding principles of amity, sincerity, mutual benefit, and inclusiveness as articulated by Xi himself. This philosophy has led China to become the largest trading partner for 18 neighboring countries, with its trade relationship with ASEAN flourishing over the last 5 years. Luo Yangquan, a research fellow at the Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences, highlighted the significance of cooperation between China and ASEAN in stabilizing the region amid rising global uncertainties. The tangible benefits delivered through initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative have strengthened local economies and exemplify the mutual advantages of collaboration, he noted. In Vietnam, the atmosphere is one of optimism. Many citizens are expressing enthusiasm for Xi's visit, reflecting a broader hope for enhanced collaboration. A Vietnamese resident Ade remarked on the improvements brought by Chinese infrastructure projects like the Cat Linh Ha Dong metro line, which have transformed daily life in Hanoi. More collaborative projects can only bring us closer together, he said, underscoring the local sentiment toward strengthening bilateral ties. The timing of Xi's visit is particularly poignant as it coincides with the 75th anniversary of diplomatic ties between China and Vietnam, a milestone that both nations are eager to celebrate. Chinese ambassador to Vietnam He Wei emphasized the historical depth of the relationship, stating, "Only when China-Vietnam relations develop well can we ensure mutual benefits for our peoples amid an increasingly complex international landscape." Xi's tour will also take him to Malaysia and Cambodia, countries that share similar aspirations of economic collaboration with China. In Malaysia, Minister Fahmi Fadzil articulated the government's commitment to fostering better trade relations with China, signaling mutual recognition of the need for cooperative economic strategies. Meanwhile, Cambodia's Prime Minister Hun Manet reaffirmed the strength of ties with China, positioning Beijing as a key partner in national development efforts. As the world grapples with significant geopolitical shifts, Xi's visit represents an opportunity for China to assert itself as a stabilizing force. Analysts suggest that this could redefine regional alignments as countries look to strengthen economic ties with China in the face of protectionist trends emanating from the West. The ongoing dialogue about regional economic integration, exemplified by initiatives such as the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership (RCEP) and ongoing free trade negotiations, illustrates a collective desire among ASEAN nations to enhance cooperation with China. Ultimately, Xi's Southeast Asia tour serves not only as a diplomatic mission but as a strategic maneuver to solidify China's economic foothold in a region increasingly wary of external pressures. As nations come together under shared interests and mutual benefits, the efficacy of Xi's diplomacy may set the stage for a new era of collaboration in the Asia-Pacific, one where stability and collective growth are prioritized amid a backdrop of global uncertainty. Future developments in these relationships will be closely watched as both China and its Southeast Asian neighbors navigate the evolving landscape of international trade and diplomacy.